A man named Cliff Maurer sat on my exam table on a Tuesday in March and told me he was fine. He was not fine. I could see it in the grey under his tan, in the careful way he held himself still, like a man who'd learned that if he didn't move, the thing in his belly wouldn't move either. He'd come in for a blood pressure refill. That was the story he walked in with, and like most people, he wanted me to sign it and let him go home to his cattle. That is the whole job. If you want to know what doctoring really is, most days, people come to you to be told the story they arrived with is true. For 42 years, my job was the opposite. My job was to find the thing the patient was working hard not to know, and to find it before it found him. I'm telling you about Cliff first, before I tell you about my own life, because 8 months after that Tuesday, a younger doctor and a hospital company 60 miles away decided that I was the thing that needed to be cut out of this town. They read my chart, so to speak. They wrote me up as outdated, a hazard, a liability with a license and a shaking pair of hands. They had numbers. They had a committee. They had a plan with my name on the part marked for removal. They never once examined the patient. My name is Walter Ackerman. The people in Garber, Nebraska, have called me Doc since before some of them could talk. I am 68 years old, and for most of those years, I have been the only doctor for 40 miles in any direction, which in our part of the state means I have been, at one time or another, the man who set the bone, stitched the hand, delivered the baby, sat with the dying, and signed the certificate when sitting was all there was left to do. I want to tell this slowly, the way I'd read a chart. Because if you rush it, you'll miss the thing that was actually killing the patient. And the patient, it turned out, was not me. Let me give you the history first. I came to Garber in 1983, a young man with a new degree and a debt I thought would bury me. There was an old doctor here then, a man named Harlan Ferris, who doctored this county since the Second World War out of a converted house on Main Street. He was 79, and his hands had started to wander, and he knew it, which is the part most men never get to. He took one look at me, decided I'd do, and spent 2 years teaching me what no school had. He taught me that a chart tells you what a man is willing to say, and his body tells you what's true, and that the gap between those two is where the doctor earns his keep. When Harlan died in 1986, he left me his practice, his patients, and the stethoscope his own teacher had given him in 1941. I bought the house on Main Street from his widow for $41,000, which was more than I had, and I have practiced medicine in that building every working day since. I built something there. I don't say that to boast. I say it because you have to understand what was built before you can understand what they tried to take. I delivered something close to half the people now living in Garber. I set the arm of a boy named Travis Holt, who is now the man who plows my road in winter. I sat up 3 nights with the Dennard family, the year their oldest nearly died of meningitis. And I held that girl's hand last fall when she told me, shy as anything, that she'd gotten into medical school. When the farm crisis came in the 1980s and half the county couldn't pay a light bill, I took chickens, I took firewood, I took a side of beef and an apology and a great deal of nothing, and I did not stop seeing anyone. There were 2 years in there I didn't pay myself a salary. My wife, Ruth, who I lost 4 years ago now, kept the books in those years and never once asked me to turn a sick man away, though she'd have had every right. So when I tell you I owned that practice, understand I don't only mean the deed, though I held that too. I mean it the way a man owns the field he cleared with his own hands. There's a kind of ownership that no paper grants and no committee can vote away. And I had spent 40 years earning it. The trouble, the real beginning of it, came from a thing I did out of love for this town. I was getting older. I knew it the way Harlan had known it. In the hands first, I started lying awake, worrying about what would happen to Garber when I couldn't do it anymore. A town without a doctor dries up and blows away. The young families won't come. The old ones have to drive 60 miles for a flu shot, I'd seen it happen to other towns, and I could not stand the thought of it happening to mine because I'd been too proud to plan for my own ending. So 8 years ago, I went looking for a young doctor to come carry it on. And I found one. His name was Bryce Halloway. He was good, I'll say that plainly, because the truth of this story doesn't need me to lie about him. He was 30 when he came, sharp, well-trained, quick with the new things I'd never learned. He came partly because of a state program that pays off a young doctor's school debt if he'll work a few years in a place nobody else will go. $184,000 of his debt, the state agreed to pay, if he'd give rural medicine a real commitment. That number is going to matter later, so hold on to it. I sold him a junior share of the practice cheap, far under what it was worth, because I wanted him invested, not just employed. I told myself I was building him a future. I told myself I was teaching him the way Harlan taught me. That was the first lie I told in this story, and I told it to myself. Because over those 8 years, I did something I'm not proud of. And it took me a long time and a great deal of pain to see it clearly. I taught Bryce the easy cases, and I kept the hard ones. I let him handle the colds and the blood pressures and the well-child visits. And when something walked in the door that scared me, I quietly took it back. And I called that mentorship. I held the wheel with both hands for 8 years and told a grown man it was for his own good. A teacher is supposed to hand the knife over, a little at a time, until the student's holding it alone. I never finished handing it over. I starved him of the hard things, and I called it standards. I'm not telling you that to excuse what he did. He made his own choices, and they were ugly. And he made them with his eyes open. But a man ought to be honest about the soil a thing grew in. I left a hungry, talented young man standing in my shadow for 8 years. And when somebody came along and offered him the sun, I shouldn't have been as surprised as I was. The somebody was a company called Stillwater Health. Stillwater runs a hospital 60 miles from us, in a town called Fenwick. And over the last few years, they had been buying up the small practices all across our part of the state. Now, when a hospital company buys a country doctor's office, they will tell you it's about access, about keeping care close to home, about the future. What it is actually about is the funnel. A small practice that they own sends its imaging, its lab work, its specialist referrals, its everything, up the line to the company's hospital, where the real money lives. The country doctor becomes a faucet. The town becomes a revenue stream wearing a familiar face. I had turned them down twice. Politely the first time, less politely the second. I told the man in the good suit that this town's medicine was not for sale, and I believed that settled it. It did not settle it, it just changed their plan. If they couldn't buy the practice from me, they would take it through the one part of it that wasn't mine, alone. They would take it through Bryce. I started noticing the changes about a year before the end. Small things. The kind of thing only a man who's been watching the same waiting room for 40 years would catch. Bryce stopped eating lunch at the diner with me. He started taking calls in the parking lot. A woman from Fenwick in a blazer came to observe workflow for a day and spent it counting our patients with her eyes the way a buyer counts cattle. And Bryce, my Bryce, started saying things in the modern way. Productivity, patient throughput, revenue per visit. Words that have nothing to do with whether the man on the table lives or dies. Then the medicine itself started to change. And that was the part that frightened me. Because that was the part with a body underneath it. Bryce started ordering scans, lots of them. A sore back got an expensive picture it didn't need. A headache that any first year could see was tension got sent up the line to Fenwick for imaging. The money flowed exactly the direction Stillwater wanted it to flow, and at the same time, moving fast to hit the numbers somebody was now setting for him, he started missing things. Small things at first. A medication interaction my nurse caught. A diagnosis hurried past. And then Cliff Maurer. You remember Cliff from the beginning. The man on my table in March, telling me he was fine. By March, I wasn't supposed to be seeing Cliff at all. He was Bryce's patient by then. 2 days earlier, he'd come in with belly pain, and Bryce, moving fast, eyes on a screen, had written it up as anxiety and an upset stomach, and sent him home with a sample packet and a pat on the shoulder. Cliff came back because the pain wouldn't quit. And Bryce was out that afternoon, and so an old farmer ended up on the table of the old doctor he trusted out of habit. I put my hands on him. That's the whole secret, if there is one. I shut up and I put my hands on the man, and I felt what Bryce, staring at a screen, had not. There was something pulsing in that belly that should not have been pulsing. I have felt it before. It is the worst thing you can feel under your palm, because it means a man's own largest blood vessel is failing, and the only question left is how many minutes. I did not write a careful note. I called for the helicopter to Fenwick, and I rode in the ambulance to the county line, holding pressure and praying. And the surgeons up there opened him in time, barely, and Cliff Mauer is alive today and back with his cattle and does not entirely know how close it came. I tell you that not to make myself the hero of it. Any doctor worth the name would have caught it. I tell you that because of what it became. Because 8 months later, that same case, the one where I saved a man's life, was going to be turned around and aimed at me like a gun. And the gap between those two facts, between what happened and what they said happened, is the whole disease of this story. The papers came in October. It was not a buyout offer this time. It was a notice. A formal complaint had been filed with the credentialing committee at the Fenwick Hospital, the committee that decides which doctors are allowed to admit patients there. The complaint alleged a pattern of substandard and outdated practice. It alleged that I was a risk to patient safety. It cited my informal, undocumented methods, my handshake billing, my refusal to follow current imaging protocols. And, in a stretch of words so clean it had clearly been written by a lawyer and not a doctor, it cited an incident in March in which an unstable patient was subjected to an unnecessary emergency transfer based on the physician's subjective assessment rather than established diagnostic criteria. That was Cliff. They had taken the day I felt a man's death under my hand and saved him from it. And they had written it down as recklessness. If that committee suspended my privileges, I could not admit a patient to the only hospital we use. And a country practice whose doctor can't admit a patient is, in the language of the man in the good suit, non-viable under current leadership, which meant they could force a sale to Stillwater, on Stillwater's terms. With Bryce installed as medical director, his debt paid, his future bright, and the town's medicine turned at last into a faucet. Bryce's name was not on the complaint. He was too careful for that. But I knew the shape of my own near-miss case the way I know my own hands, and only one other doctor had the chart. He hadn't filed it himself. He'd handed it to people who knew how to file it, and he'd looked the other way while they did. And in this life, that is the same thing as doing it, and we both knew it. I want to tell you that I took it like a stone wall. I didn't. There was a stretch in there, maybe 2 weeks, that was the worst since I lost Ruth. Because the cruelty of the charge was that it found the one fear every aging doctor carries. What if they're right? What if my hands have started to wander, like Harlan's did, and I'm the only man in the county too proud to see it? I lay awake, doing the cruel arithmetic on myself. I had 30 years and a good name. They had a committee and a company and a younger man with steadier hands. I started watching my own fingers in the morning, looking for the tremor. And a man who goes looking for a tremor will always find one. The low point had a date. It was a Thursday night, and a child came into the clinic with a fever and a stiff neck. And for 1 black hour I could not be sure. Meningitis? Or a virus? Or my own fear playing my own knowledge back at me out of tune? I stood in that exam room and felt for one moment exactly like the man they said I was. The old fool who couldn't be trusted to know. I sent her to Fenwick to be safe, second-guessing every mile. And it turned out to be a virus, and she was fine. And I drove home and sat in the dark and thought, plainly, maybe I should just let them have it. Maybe 40 years is enough, and a man should know when to put the knife down before somebody makes him. What saved me was not courage. It was a habit. The habit was this. When a case scares you, you stop arguing with your fear, and you go gather the facts. Because fear is a symptom, and facts are the disease underneath, and you treat the disease. So at 6 o'clock the next morning, I went to the clinic, and I did what I should have done the day the papers came. I stopped being the patient and went back to being the doctor. I started with my nurse, Ada Wexler, who has worked beside me for 40 years and misses nothing. Ada had already seen it, of course. Nurses always see it first. They're the ones in the room when the doctor's out of it. She had been quietly keeping something, and when I finally asked her straight, she took me into the back room where we store the old files, and she showed me. When Stillwater's influence started flowing through Bryce, one of the modern improvements had been to put everything on the computer and shred the old paper. Efficiency. But Ada, who has buried 2 filing systems and trusts none of them, had never thrown a paper chart away in her life. She had kept them. Boxes of them. 40 years of charts in my own handwriting, the real history of this town's health, including every note I'd ever made on Cliff Mauer, and every note that showed, in plain ink with dates, the difference between how I practice and how the man they wanted to replace me had started to. Paper doesn't update itself when it's convenient. That's its whole virtue. The digital record could be reframed, annotated, made to tell the story Stillwater needed. The paper said what it said the day I wrote it. That was the first thing I gathered. The second thing I went and got from the law and from the government, and it is the part they never thought to check, because men who count cattle with their eyes don't read the brands. I drove to a lawyer 2 counties over, a careful woman named Paula Reyes, who'd handled Ruth's estate. And over a week we pulled apart the actual bones of what Stillwater would be buying if they ever pried me loose. And what we found was that they had read the patient as wrong as Bryce read Cliff. Here is what they didn't know. Told as plainly as I can. My clinic is not just a doctor's office. Years ago, on Harlan's old advice and a government program designed to keep doctors in places like Garber, I had the practice certified as a rural health clinic. It is a federal designation. It means, in plain English, that the government pays a little more for the care we give, because the alternative is a town with no care at all. That extra money is most of what makes a tiny practice like mine able to keep its doors open. It is also most of what made us worth buying. But that designation is not a thing that comes with the building. Like a furnace, it is tied to how the practice is structured and, critically, to the physician of record who runs it, me. The certification does not simply transfer in a change of ownership. A new owner has to re-qualify, from the beginning, under rules that have gotten much harder than they were when I signed up. And Stillwater, with its hospital and its corporate structure, would not qualify the same way at all. The day they took it over, much of that extra money, the money that made the whole deal pencil out, would evaporate. And then there was the matter of Bryce's debt. That $184,000 the state had paid off for him, in exchange for his commitment to serve rural medicine here. I had Paula read the actual contract he'd signed 8 years ago, the one he'd surely forgotten the fine print of, the way young men forget the fine print of every promise they think they'll never have to keep. If he left rural service early, or if the clinic lost its rural standing, the obligation didn't just vanish, it clawed back. He would owe the state that money, personally, with penalties. So I sat in Paula's office, and I finally saw the whole patient on the table, the way I should have from the start. If they forced me out, the certification died. If the certification died, the extra money died, and the practice they were buying was worth a fraction of what they'd offered. and the young man they were installing as the prize of the deal would, the moment that deal closed, personally owe the state of Nebraska the better part of $200,000 he did not have. They were not buying a thriving practice, they were buying a shell and chaining their golden boy to an anvil. And they had no idea, because they had read the chart and never put their hands on the patient. I had one more thing to do before the hearing, and it was the hardest, because it had nothing to do with leverage and everything to do with the man I wanted to still be when this was over. I asked Bryce to come to the clinic, after hours, alone. He came, I'll give him that. He stood in the exam room where I'd taught him to listen to a heart, with his good coat on, and at first he gave me the company's words. He talked about the future of medicine and the unsustainability of solo practice, and how the town would be better served by a real system. He had clearly rehearsed it. It is a thing they teach them now, how to describe the gutting of a place as its salvation. I let him finish. Then I asked him one question. I asked him whether he had read Cliff Mauer's chart before he sent him home. And the rehearsal stopped. Because there is a truth about a man who actually went to medical school, who actually once wanted to heal people, even if he buried that man under debt and ambition and a hospital company's flattery. You can bury the doctor, you can't quite kill him. And when I said Cliff's name, the salesman went out of Bryce's face, and underneath it, for just a second, was the 30-year-old who'd come here 8 years ago genuinely meaning to do good. He didn't justify it. He didn't deny it. He just sat down on the stool, the patient's stool, like a student again. And after a long quiet, he asked me, in a voice I hadn't heard from him in years, how the Mauer surgery had gone. Whether the man had pulled through, whether there'd been damage to the kidneys. A clinical question, the right one. The question a doctor asks. I told him Cliff was alive and back with his cattle, and Bryce looked at his own hands. The steady young hands they'd told me would replace my shaking old ones. And I understood that he had spent 8 months not letting himself ask that question, because the answer was the one thing his whole new story couldn't survive. He'd had to not know whether the man lived, in order to keep believing I was the danger and he was the future. He told me then, not as an excuse but as a fact, that Stillwater had shown him the math on his own life, the debt, the kid coming, the impossible long road of being a country saint the way I'd been. They'd told him I would never let him grow, never hand it over, that he'd be my assistant until I died. And the cruelest part of it was that this was not entirely a lie. I had kept him my shadow. The company had simply found the wound I'd left in him and poured their poison straight into it. They told me you were the obstacle, he said. I know, I said. I helped them believe it. But you're the one who handed them the chart. He didn't argue. He couldn't. The hearing was 11 days later, in a conference room at the Fenwick Hospital, the kind of room with a long table and a screen on the wall and not one window. 7 members of the credentialing committee, a lawyer for the hospital, and the man in the good suit from Stillwater, sitting against the wall like a man who'd already counted the money, here to watch a formality. They had their presentation. They walked the committee through their version of me. Outdated, informal, a risk. They put Cliff Mauer's case on the screen, reframed in that clean lawyer's language. An old doctor's reckless transfer based on a hunch. When they finished, the chairman, a decent enough man named Dr. Lund, who I think was uneasy with the whole business, asked if I cared to respond. I did not bring a lawyer to the front of the room. Paula was there, in the back, but I'd asked her to let me do this part myself. I am a doctor. The charge was about medicine. I would answer it as a doctor. I started with Cliff, because they had, and because the truth of a case is always better than the spin of it. I didn't show them my leverage first. I've learned that a man's logic only opens after his conscience does. So I told them about the body before I told them about the paper. I described what I'd felt under my hand that Tuesday in March. I described, in terms every doctor in that room understood, and the lawyers did not, exactly what a pulsing abdominal mass means, and exactly how many minutes a man has when it presents that way. I told them that the patient had been seen 2 days earlier by their preferred young physician, working at the pace their company sets, and sent home as anxiety. And then I asked Ada to bring in the paper. She set my handwritten chart on the table, dated in March, next to the digital record Bryce had created, and I let the two documents sit there side by side and tell the committee which doctor had read the chart and which one had read the man. The room was very quiet. Doctors know. You can sell a lawyer a story about diagnostic criteria. You cannot sell a room full of physicians the idea that catching a leaking aneurysm with your hands is reckless and missing it on a screen is the standard of care. They knew which one of us they'd want in the room if it were their father on the table. That was the first blow, and it was enough to kill the complaint. I could see it die on their faces. But a dead complaint just sends everyone home and lets Stillwater try again next year with a cleaner story. So I let them have the second thing, the cold thing, the thing for the man against the wall. I told the committee, and I made sure the man in the good suit could hear every word, exactly what they would be acquiring if this complaint somehow succeeded and a sale went through. I laid out the certification and how it would not survive the change of hands. I laid out the numbers, what the practice was actually worth the day it stopped being a rural health clinic, which was a small fraction of what they'd budgeted. And then, looking straight at the suit, I laid out the clawback. I told them that the young doctor they planned to crown would, on the day the deal closed, personally owe the state $184,000 and change. I watched the man do the arithmetic. I have spent 40 years watching people's faces while I tell them things they didn't want to know. And I know the exact look of a man who has just understood that the patient he thought was healthy is, in fact, terminal. He understood that there was no deal. There had never been a deal. There had only been an old man they'd misread, sitting on top of a structure they'd never bothered to examine. He left before the vote, didn't even gather his papers cleanly. The committee voted 7-0 to dismiss the complaint, and Dr. Lund shook my hand at the door and didn't quite meet my eyes. And that was the end of it. Now, here is where a younger man, or an angrier one, would have kept swinging. I had more in my bag than I'd used. I had Cliff Mauer's case, fully documented, and the contrast between his care and mine was not just enough to clear me. It was enough to put before the state medical board as a complaint against Bryce, a young doctor with a missed, leaking aneurysm in his record, reported by his own mentor, would have a very hard road. I could have ended him. I had the chart, the dates, the witness in Ada. I could have made sure the man who tried to bury me never practiced medicine again. I thought about it. I won't pretend I didn't. There was a Thursday night part of me, the part that had sat in the dark, doubting my own hands, that wanted very badly to make somebody pay for those 2 weeks. I didn't file it. I drove back to Garber, and I sat in the clinic that Harlan left me, and I thought about what I had spent 42 years doing, which was keeping people in this county from dying before their time. And I decided I was not going to end that record by killing a young doctor's career, even one who'd tried to end mine. The state of Nebraska is short of doctors. Towns like Garber are dying for lack of them. The world does not need one more good physician driven out of medicine. It needs them in rooms, with their hands on people. My revenge would have cost the world a doctor, and the world is too poor in doctors to pay it. So I called Bryce, and I told him I wasn't filing anything. I told him the offer in Fenwick was gone, that he'd find that out soon enough, and that the debt was still his. And then I told him the only thing I had left worth giving him, which was a choice. He could leave clean, no board complaint, no mark on his record, just a young man moving on. And the town would lose its second doctor, but keep its first a while longer, and I'd start the search again. Or he could stay, finish his rural service the honest way, work off what he owed by actually doing the work, and let me spend whatever years I have left finishing the thing I'd never finished, which was handing him the knife. All of it this time. The hard cases, the whole town, everything Harlan handed me. And when I was done, the practice would be his, the right way, not bought from a company but earned from a man. He didn't answer right away. He's not a stupid man, and he knew what he'd done. And I think the size of being forgiven was harder for him to stand than punishment would have been. In the end, he left. I won't dress it up. He took the clean exit, sold his house, moved his family to a city where the medicine is the modern kind, and a man can be a faucet without ever having to feel a death under his hand. Maybe that's the right life for him, I hope. For his patient's sake, that somewhere along the way he remembers to put the screen down and touch the man on the table. I taught him how. The wanting to is the part I couldn't teach. The Dennard girl, the one who got into medical school, comes by the clinic on her breaks. She follows me around the way I once followed Harlan, and she asks the right questions. And she has the thing you can't teach, the thing that makes a person actually want to know what's true, even when the patient would rather they didn't. Last week, I took Harlan's stethoscope out of the drawer where it has sat for 8 years, waiting for a day that I kept thinking was coming and that never quite came. It was given to him in 1941 and to me in 1986, and I had always meant it for Bryce, on the day I finally made him a full partner. That day never arrived, and now I understand it was never going to, because the gift was always waiting for someone who wanted to do the work, and I'd been giving it in my head to someone who wanted to do the deal. I gave it to the Dennard girl instead. I told her what Harlan told me. A stethoscope is a tool that forces you to be quiet and listen. Half of medicine, more than half, is shutting up long enough to hear what's actually wrong. Underneath what the patient is telling you, underneath what the chart says, underneath what's convenient for everybody, including you. The body does not lie. People do. And systems do. And sometimes the loudest liar is your own fear. The instrument just makes you hold still and listen for the truth under all of it. They thought I was an old man who'd stopped being able to read the chart. They were the ones who never examined the patient. I'm still here. The doors are still open. And in a town like this one, that is the only victory that was ever worth a thing.